Introduction. The dim light of stars filtered through the leafy canopy above us, and the shadowy form of our guide once more appeared at my horse's head. It was only for an instant, however, and then we were plunged again into the inky darkness of a tropical jungle. We had planned to reach the distant Tinguian village in the late afternoon, but had failed to reckon with the deliberateness of native carriers. It was only by urging our horses that we were able to ford the broad Abra ere the last rays of the sun dropped behind the mountains. And then, in this land of no twilights, night had settled quickly over us. We had made our way up the mountainside, through the thick jungle, only to find that the trail, long imperceptible to us, had escaped even the keen eyes of our guide. For several hours we wandered about, lost in the darkness. On and on we went, through narrow paths, steep in places, and made rough and dangerous by sharp rocks as well as by those long creepers of the jungle whose thorny fingers are ever ready to seize horse or rider. Occasionally we came out of the forest, only to cross rocky mountain streams, or perhaps it was the same stream that we crossed many times. Our horses, becoming weary and uncertain of foot, grew more and more reluctant to plunge into the dark, swiftly flowing water. And our patience was nearly exhausted when we at last caught sight of dim lights in the valley below. Half an hour later we rode into Manabo. I shall never forget that first picture. It was a weird spectacle. Coming out of the darkness, we were almost convinced that we had entered a new world. Against the blackness of the night, grass-roofed houses stood outlined in the dim light of a bonfire, and squatting around that fire, unclad save for gay blankets wrapped about their shoulders, were brown-skinned men smoking long pipes, while women bedecked with bright beads were spinning cotton. As they worked in the flickering light, they stretched their distaffs at arm's length into the air like witches waving their wands, and with that the elfland picture was complete. In the stillness of the night a single voice could be heard reciting some tale in a sing-song tone, which was interrupted only when peals of laughter burst forth from the listeners, or when a scrawny dog rose to bark at an imaginary noise until the shouts of the men quieted him and he returned to his bed in the warm ashes. Later we learned that these were the regular social gatherings of the Tinguian, and every night during the dry season one or more of these bonfires were to be seen in the village. After we had attained to the footing of welcome guests in these circles, we found that a good storyteller was always present, and, while the men smoked, the women spun, and the dogs slept, he entertained us with tales of heroes who knew the magic of the betel nut, or with stories of spirits and their power over the lives of men. The following are some of the tales heard first around the campfire of the distant mountain village. A Panabolinian and the Sun Tinguian. One day a Panabolinian and her sister-in-law went out to gather greens. They walked to the woods to the place where the sixiclat grew, for the tender leaves of this vine are very good to eat. Suddenly while searching about in the underbrush, a Panabolinian cried out with joy, for she had found the vine, and she started to pick the leaves. Pull as hard as she would, however, the leaves did not come loose, and all at once the vine wound itself around her body and began carrying her upward. One. Far up through the air she went until she reached the sky, and there the vine set her down under a tree. A Panabolinian was so surprised to find herself in the sky that for some time she just sat and looked around, and then, hearing a rooster crow, she arose to see if she could find it. Not far from where she had sat was a beautiful spring surrounded by tall betel-nut trees whose tops were pure gold. Rare beads were the sands of the spring, and the place where the women set their jars when they came to dip water was a large golden plate. As a Panabolinian stood admiring the beauties of this spring, she beheld a small house nearby, and she was filled with fear lest the owner should find her there. She looked about for some means of escape and finally climbed to the top of a betel-nut tree and hid. Now the owner of this house was eyeing it to the sun, but he was never at home in the daylight, for it was his duty to shine in the sky and give light to all the world. At the close of the day when the big star took his place in the sky to shine through the night, Einianit returned to his house, but early the next morning he was always off again. From her place in the top of the betel-nut tree, a Panabolinian saw the sun when he came home at evening time, and again the next morning she saw him leave. When she was sure that he was out of sight, she climbed down and entered his dwelling, for she was very hungry. She cooked rice, and into a pot of boiling water she dropped a stick which immediately became fish 3, so that she had all she wished to eat. When she was no longer hungry, she lay down on the bed to sleep. Now late in the afternoon Einianit returned from his work and went to fish in the river near his house, and he caught a big fish. While he sat on the bank cleaning his catch, he happened to look up toward his house and was startled to see that it appeared to be on fire point, for he hurried home, but when he reached the house he saw that it was not burning at all, and he entered. On his bed he beheld what looked like a flame of fire, but upon going closer he found that it was a beautiful woman fast asleep. Einianit stood for some time wondering what he should do, and then he decided to cook some food and invite this lovely creature to eat with him. He put rice over the fire to boil and cut into pieces the fish he had caught. The noise of this awakened Apanabalinian, and she slipped out of the house and back to the top of the betel nut tree. The son did not see her leave, and when the food was prepared he called her, but the bed was empty and he had to eat alone. That night Einianit could not sleep well, for all the time he wondered who the beautiful woman could be. The next morning, however, he rose as usual and set forth to shine in the sky, for that was his work. That day Apanabalinian stole again to the house of the sun and cooked food, and when she returned to the betel nut tree she left rice and fish ready for the son when he came home. Late in the afternoon Einianit went into his home, and when he found pots of hot rice and fish over the fire he was greatly troubled. After he had eaten he walked a long time in the fresh air. "Perhaps it is done by the lovely woman who looks like a flame of fire," he said. "If she comes again I will try to catch her." The next day the sun shone in the sky as before, and when the afternoon grew late he called to the big star to hurry to take his place, for he was impatient to reach home. As he drew near the house he saw that it again looked as if it was on fire. He crept quietly up the ladder, and when he had reached the top he sprang in and shut the door behind him. Apanabalinian, who was cooking rice over the fire, was surprised and angry that she had been caught, but the son gave her betel nut 5 which was covered with gold, and they chewed together and told each other their names. Then Apanabalinian took up the rice and fish, and as they ate they talked together and became acquainted. After some time Apanabalinian and the son were married, and every morning the sun went to shine in the sky, and upon his return at night he found his supper ready for him. He began to be troubled, however, to know where the food came from, for though he brought home a fine fish every night, Apanabalinian always refused to cook it. One night he watched her prepare their meal, and he saw that, instead of using the nice fish he had brought, she only dropped a stick into the pot of boiling water. "Why do you try to cook a stick?" asked Einianit in surprise. "So that we can have fish to eat," answered his wife. "If you cook that stick for a month, it will not be soft," said Einianit. "Take this fish that I caught in the net, for it will be good." But Apanabalinian only laughed at him, and when they were ready to eat she took the cover off the pot and there was plenty of nice soft fish. The next night and the next, Apanabalinian cooked the stick, and Einianit became greatly troubled, for he saw that though the stick always supplied them with fish, it never grew smaller. Finally he asked Apanabalinian again why it was that she cooked the stick instead of the fish he brought, and she said, "Do you not know of the woman on earth who has magical power and can change things?" "Yes," answered the son, "and now I know that you have great power." "Well, then," said his wife, "do not ask again why I cooked the stick." And they ate their supper of rice and the fish which the stick made. One night not long after this Apanabalinian told her husband that she wanted to go with him the next day when he made light in the sky. "Oh, no, you cannot," said the son, "for it is very hot up there, 6, and you cannot stand the heat." "We will take many blankets and pillows," said the woman, "and when the heat becomes very great, I will hide under them." Again and again Ainianit begged her not to go, but as often she insisted on accompanying him, and early in the morning they set out, carrying with them many blankets and pillows. First, they went to the east, and as soon as they arrived the sun began to shine, and Apanabalinian was with him. They traveled toward the west, but when morning had passed into noontime and they had reached the middle of the sky, Apanabalinian was so hot that she melted and became oil. Then Ainianit put her into a bottle and wrapped her in the blankets and pillows and dropped her down to earth. Now one of the women of Apanabalinian's town was at the spring dipping water when she heard something fall near her. Turning to look, she beheld a bundle of beautiful blankets and pillows which she began to unroll, and inside she found the most beautiful woman she had ever seen. Frightened at her discovery, the woman ran as fast as she could to the town, where she called the people together and told them to come at once to the spring. They all hastened to the spot, and there they found Apanabalinian, for whom they had been searching everywhere. "Where have you been?" asked her father. "We have searched all over the world and we could not find you." "I have come from Pindayan," answered Apanabalinian. "Enemies of our people kept me there till I made my escape while they were asleep at night." All were filled with joy that the lost one had returned, and they decided that at the next moon 7 they would perform a ceremony for the spirits 8 and invite all the relatives who were mourning for Apanabalinian. So they began to prepare for the ceremony, and while they were pounding rice, Apanabalinian asked her mother to prick her little finger where it itched, and as she did so a beautiful baby boy popped out. The people were very much surprised at this, and they noticed that every time he was bathed the baby grew very fast, so that, in a short time, he was able to walk. Then they were anxious to know who was the husband of Apanabalinian, but she would not tell them, and they decided to invite everyone in the world to the ceremony that they might not overlook him. They sent for the betel nuts that were covered with gold 9, and when they had oiled them they commanded them to go to all the towns and compel the people to come to the ceremony. "If anyone refuses to come, grow on his knee," said the people, and the betel nuts departed to do as they were bidden. As the guests began to arrive, the people watched carefully for one who might be the husband of Apanabalinian, but none appeared and they were greatly troubled. Finally they went to the old woman, Alakotan, who was able to talk with the spirits, and begged her to find what town had not been visited by the betel nuts which had been sent to invite the people. After she had consulted the spirits, the old woman said, "You have invited all the people except Ainianit, who lives up above. Now you must send a betel nut to summon him. It may be that he is the husband of Apanabalinian, for the sixiclat vine carried her up when she went to gather greens." So a betel nut was called and bidden to summon Ainianit. The betel nut went up to the sun, who was in his house, and said, "Good morning, Sunday. I have come to summon you to a ceremony which the father and mother of Apanabalinian are making for the spirits. If you do not want to go, I will grow on your head 10. "Grow on my head," said the sun. "I do not wish to go." So the betel nut jumped upon his head and grew until it became so tall that the sun was not able to carry it, and he was in great pain. "Oh, grow on my pig," begged the sun. So the betel nut jumped upon the pig's head and grew, but it was so heavy that the pig could not carry it and squealed all the time. At last the sun saw that he would have to obey the summons, and he said to the betel nut, "Get off my pig and I will go." So Ainianit came to the ceremony, and as soon as Apanabalinian and the baby saw him, they were very happy and ran to meet him. Then the people knew that this was the husband of Apanabalinian, and they waited eagerly for him to come up to them. As he drew near, however, they saw that he did not walk, for he was round, and then they perceived that he was not a man but a large stone. All her relatives were very angry to find that Apanabalinian had married a stone, and they compelled her to take off her beads 11 and her good clothes, for, they said, she must now dress in old clothes and go again to live with the stone. So Apanabalinian put on the rags that they brought her and at once set out with the stone for his home. No sooner had they arrived there, however, than he became a handsome man, and they were very happy. Tinguian hunters, Tinguian hunters. Returning from the hunt, returning from the hunt. In one moon, said the sun, we will make a ceremony for the spirits, and I will pay your father and mother the marriage price 12 for you. This pleased Apanabalinian very much, and they used magic so that they had many neighbors who came to pound rice 13 for them and to build a large spirit house. 14. Then they sent oiled betel nuts to summon their relatives to the ceremony. The father of Apanabalinian did not want to go, but the betel nut threatened to grow on his knee if he did not. So he commanded all the people in the town to wash their hair and their clothes, and when all was ready they set out. When they reached the town they were greatly surprised to find that the stone had become a man, and they chewed the magic betel nuts to see who he might be. It was discovered that he was the son of a couple in Apanabalinian's own town, and the people all rejoiced that this couple had found the son whom they had thought lost. They named him Apanitala, and his parents paid the marriage price for his wife, the spirit house 9 times full of valuable jars. 15. Hunting with the blowgun, hunting with the blowgun. After that all danced and made merry for 1 moon, and when the people departed for their homes Inianit and his wife went with them to live on the earth. Apanabalinian Tinguian. The most beautiful girl in all the world was Apanabalinian of Nalpangan. Many young men had come to her brother, Apanabalajan, to ask for her hand in marriage, but he had refused them all, for he awaited one who possessed great power. Then it happened that the fame of her beauty spread over all the world till it reached even to Edison, and in that place there lived a man of great power named Gagaon. Now Gagaon, who was a handsome man, had sought among all the pretty girls but never, until he heard of the great beauty of Apanabalinian, had he found one whom he wished to wed. Then he determined that she should be his wife, and he begged his mother to help him win her. So Dinawagan, the mother of Gagaon, took her hat which looked like a sunbeam and set out at once for Nalpangan, and when she arrived there she was greeted by Abang, the mother of the lovely maiden, who presently began to prepare food for them. 16. She put the pot over the fire, and when the water boiled she broke up a stick and threw the pieces into the pot, and immediately they became fish. Then she brought basi 17 in a large jar, and Dinawagan, counting the notches in the rim 18, perceived that the jar had been handed down through 9 generations. They ate and drank together, and after they had finished the meal, Dinawagan told Apanabalajan of her son's wishes, and asked if he was willing that his sister should marry Gagaon. Apanabalajan, who had heard of the power of the suitor, at once gave his consent. And Dinawagan departed for home, leaving a gold cup as an engagement present. 19. Gagaon was watching at the door of his house for his mother's return, and when she told him of her success, he was so happy that he asked all the people in the town to go with him the next day to Nalpangan to arrange the amount he must pay for his bride. 20. Now the people of Nalpangan wanted a great price for this girl who was so beautiful, and the men of the 2 towns debated for a long time before they could come to an agreement. Finally, however, it was decided that Gagaon should fill the spirit house 18 times with valuable things, and when he had done this, they were all satisfied and went to the yard where they danced and beat on the copper gongs. 21. All the pretty girls danced their best, and one who wore big jars about her neck made more noise than the others as she danced, and the jars sang Kaitol, Kaitol, Kanatol, Inca, Inca, Inkatol. But when Apanabalinian, the bride of Gagaon, came down out of the house to dance, the sunshine vanished, so beautiful was she, and as she moved about, the river came up into the town, and striped fish bit at her heels. For 3 months the people remained here feasting and dancing, and then early one morning they took Apanabalinian to her new home in Edison. The trail that led from one town to the other had become very beautiful in the meantime, the grass and trees glistened with bright lights, and the waters of the tiny streams dazzled the eyes with their brightness as Apanabalinian waded across. When they reached the spring of Gawgon, they found that it, too, was more beautiful than ever before. Each grain of sand had become a bead, and the place where the women set their jars when they came to dip water had become a big dish. Then said Apana to his people, "Go tell Gawgon to bring an old man, for I want to make a spring for Apana." So an old man was brought, and Apana cut off his head and put it in the ground, and sparkling water bubbled up. 22 The body he made into a tree to shade his sister when she came to dip water, and the drops of blood as they touched the ground were changed into valuable beads. Even the path from the spring to the house was covered with big plates, and everything was made beautiful for Apana. Now during all this time Apana had kept her face covered so that she had never seen her husband, for although he was a handsome man, one of the pretty girls who was jealous of the bride had told her that he had 3 noses, and she was afraid to look at him. After her people had all returned to their homes, she grew very unhappy, and when her mother-in-law commanded her to cook she had to feel her way around, for she would not uncover her face. Finally she became so sad that she determined to run away. One night when all were asleep, she used magical power and changed herself into oil. 23 Then she slid through the bamboo floor and made her escape without anyone seeing her. On and on she went until she came to the middle of the jungle, and then she met a wild rooster who asked her where she was going. "I am running away from my husband," replied Apana, "for he has 3 noses and I do not want to live with him." "Oh," said the rooster, "some crazy person must have told you that. Do not believe it. Gawgon is a handsome man, for I have often seen him when he comes here to snare chickens." 24. But Apana paid no heed to the rooster, and she went on until she reached a big tree where perched a monkey, and he also asked where she was going. "I am running away from my husband," answered the girl, "for he has 3 noses and I do not want to live with him." "Oh, do not believe that," said the monkey. "Someone who told you that must have wanted to marry him herself, for he is a handsome man." Still Apana went on until she came to the ocean, and then, as she could go no farther, she sat down to rest. As she sat there pondering what she should do, a carabao 25 came along, and thinking that she would ride a while she climbed up on its back. No sooner had she done so than the animal plunged into the water and swam with her until they reached the other side of the great ocean. There they came to a large orange tree, and the carabao told her to eat some of the luscious fruit while he fed on the grass nearby. As soon as he had left her, however, he ran straight to his master, Kadiadawan, and told him of the beautiful girl. Kadiadawan was very much interested and quickly combed his hair and oiled it, put on his striped coat 26 and belt, and went with the carabao to the orange tree. Apana, looking down from her place in the tree, was surprised to see a man coming with her friend, the carabao, but as they drew near, she began talking with him, and soon they became acquainted. Before long, Kadiadawan had persuaded the girl to become his wife, and he took her to his home. From that time every night his house looked as if it was on fire, because of the beauty of his bride. After they had been married for some time, Kadiadawan and Apana decided to make a ceremony 27 for the spirits, so they called the magic betel nuts 28 and oiled them and said to them, "Go to all the towns and invite our relatives to come to the ceremony which we shall make. If they do not want to come, then grow on their knees until they are willing to attend." So the betel nuts started in different directions, and one went to Apana in Nalpangan and said, "Kadiadawan is making a ceremony for the spirits, and I have come to summon you to attend." "We cannot go," said Apana, "for we are searching for my sister who is lost." "You must come," replied the betel nut, "or I shall grow on your knee." "Grow on my pig," answered Apana, so the betel nut went on to the pig's back and grew into a tall tree, and it became so heavy that the pig could not carry it, but squealed all the time. Then Apanabalajan, seeing that he must obey, said to the betel nut, "Get off my pig, and we will go." The betel nut got off the pig's back, and the people started for the ceremony. When they reached the river, Goagoan was there waiting to cross, for the magic nuts had forced him to go also. Then Kadiadawan, seeing them, sent more betel nuts to the river, and the people were carried across by the nuts. As soon as they reached the town, the dancing began, and while Goagoan was dancing with Apanabalinian, he seized her and put her in his belt. 29 Kadiadawan, who saw this, was so angry that he threw his spear and killed Goagoan. Then Apanabalinian escaped and ran into the house, and her husband brought his victim back to life, and asked him why he had seized the wife of his host. Goagoan explained that she was his wife who had been lost, and the people were very much surprised, for they had not recognized her at first. Then all the people discussed what should be done to bring peace between the two men, and it was finally decided that Kadiadawan must pay both Apanabalajan and Goagoan the price that was first demanded for the beautiful girl. After this was done, all were happy, and the guardian spirit of Kadiadawan gave them a golden house in which to live. Goagoan of Adasan Tinguian. Apanabalinian was sick with a headache, and she lay on a mat alone in her house. Suddenly she remembered some fruit that she had heard of but had never seen, and she said to herself, "Oh, I wish I had some of the oranges of Goagoan of Adasan." Now Apanabalinian did not realize that she had spoken aloud, but Apanitala, her husband, lying in the spirit house 30 outside, heard her talking and asked what it was she said. Fearing to tell him the truth lest he should risk his life in trying to get the oranges for her, she said, "I wish I had some biw, a fruit." Apanitala at once got up, and, taking a sack, went out to find some of the fruit for his wife. When he returned with the sack full, she said, "Put it on the bamboo hanger above the fire, and when my head is better I will eat it." So Apanitala put the fruit on the hanger and returned to the spirit house, but when Apanabalinian tried to eat, the fruit made her sick and she threw it away. "What is the matter?" called Apanitala as he heard her drop the fruit. "I merely dropped one," she replied, and returned to her mat. After a while Apanabalinian again said, "Oh, I wish I had some of the oranges of Goagoan of Adasan," and Apanitala, who heard her from the spirit house, inquired, "What is that you say?" "I wish I had some fish eggs," answered his wife, for she did not want him to know the truth. Then Apanitala took his net and went to the river, determined to please his wife if possible. When he had caught a nice fish, he opened it with his knife and took out the eggs. Then he spat on the place he had cut, and it was healed and the fish swam away. 31. Pleased that he was able to gratify his wife's wishes, he hastened home with the eggs, and while his wife was roasting them over the fire, he returned to the spirit house. She tried to eat, but the eggs did not taste good to her, and she threw them down under the house to the dogs. "What is the matter?" called Apanitala. "Why are the dogs barking?" "I dropped some of the eggs," replied his wife, and she went back to her mat. By and by she again said, "I wish I had some of the oranges of Goagoan of Adasan." But when her husband asked what she wished, she replied, "I want a deer's liver to eat." So Apanitala took his dogs to the mountains, where they hunted until they caught a deer, and when he had cut out its liver he spat on the wound, and it was healed so that the deer ran away. But Apanabalinian could not eat the liver any more than she could the fruit or the fish eggs, and when Apanitala heard the dogs barking, he knew that she had thrown it away. Then he grew suspicious and, changing himself into a centipede, 32 hid in a crack in the floor. And when his wife again wished for some of the oranges, he overheard her. "Why did you not tell me the truth, Apanabalinian?" he asked. "Because," she replied, "no one who has gone to Addison has ever come back, and I did not want you to risk your life." Nevertheless, Apanitala determined to go for the oranges, and he commanded his wife to bring him rice straw. After he had burned it, he put the ashes in the water with which he washed his hair. 33 Then she brought coconut oil and rubbed his hair, and fetched a dark clout, a fancy belt, and a headband, and she baked cakes for him to take on the journey. Apanitala cut a vine 34 which he planted by the stove 35 and told his wife that if the leaves wilted she would know that he was dead. Then he took his spear and head axe 36 and started on the long journey. When Apanitala arrived at the well of a giantess, all the betel nut trees bowed. Then the giantess shouted and all the world trembled. "How strange," thought Apanitala, "that all the world shakes when that woman shouts." But he continued on his way without stopping. As he passed the place of the old woman, Alakotan, she sent out her little dog and it bit his leg. "Do not proceed," said the old woman, "for ill luck awaits you. If you go on, you will never return to your home." Sugar cane press. Vats for boiling sugar cane juice. Vats for boiling sugar cane juice. But Apanitala paid no attention to the old woman, and by he came to the home of the lightning. "Where are you going?" asked the lightning. "I am going to get some oranges of Gagon of Addison," replied Apanitala. "Go stand on that high rock that I may see what your sign is," commanded the lightning. So he stood on the high rock, but when the lightning flashed, Apanitala dodged. "Do not go," said the lightning, "for you have a bad sign, and you will never come back." Still Apanitala did not heed. Soon he arrived at the place of Silit, Loud Thunder, 37, who also asked him, "Where are you going, Apanitala?" "I am going to get oranges of Gagon of Addison," he replied. Then the thunder commanded, "Stand on that high stone so that I can see if you have a good sign." He stood on the high stone, and when the thunder made a loud noise he jumped. Whereupon Silit also advised him not to go on. In spite of all the warnings, Apanitala continued his journey, and upon coming to the ocean he used magical power, so that when he stepped on his head axe it sailed away, carrying him far across the sea to the other side. Then after a short walk he came to a spring where women were dipping water, and he asked what spring it was. Grinding corn. Making a harrow. "This is the spring of Gagon of Addison," replied the women. "And who are you that you dare come here?" Without replying he went on toward the town, but he found that he could not go inside, for it was surrounded by a bank which reached almost to the sky. While he stood with bowed head pondering what he should do, the chief of the spiders came up and asked why he was so sorrowful. "I am sad," answered Apanitala, "because I cannot climb up this bank." Then the spider went to the top and spun a thread 38, and upon this Apanitala climbed up into town. Now Gagon was asleep in his spirit house, and when he awoke and saw Apanitala sitting near, he was surprised and ran toward his house to get his spear and head axe, but Apanitala called to him, saying, "Good morning, cousin Gagon. Do not be angry, I only came to buy some of your oranges for my wife." Then Gagon took him to the house and brought a whole carabao 39 for him to eat, and he said, "If you cannot eat all the carabao, you cannot have the oranges for your wife." Apanitala grew very sorrowful, for he knew that he could not eat all the meat, but just at that moment the chief of the ants and flies came to him and inquired what was the trouble. As soon as he was told, the chief called all the ants and flies and they ate the whole carabao. Apanitala, greatly relieved, went then to Gagon and said, "I have finished eating the food which you gave me." Gagon was greatly surprised at this, and, leading the way to the place where the oranges grew, he told Apanitala to climb the tree and get all he wanted. As he was about to ascend the tree, Apanitala noticed that the branches were sharp knives, so he went as carefully as he could. Nevertheless, when he had secured 2 oranges, he stepped on one of the knives and was cut. He quickly fastened the fruit to his spear, and immediately it flew away straight to his town and into his house. Apanabalinian was just going down the bamboo ladder out of the house, and hearing something drop on the floor, she went back to look and found the oranges from Edison. She eagerly ate the fruit, rejoicing that her husband had been able to reach the place where they grew. Then she thought to look at the vine, whose leaves were wilted, and she knew that her husband was dead. Soon after this a son was born to Apanabalinian, and she called his name Kanag. He grew rapidly, becoming a strong lad, and he was the bravest of all his companions. One day while Kanag was playing out in the yard, he spun his top and it struck the garbage pot of an old woman, who became very angry and cried, "If you were a brave boy, you would get your father whom Gagon killed." Kanag ran to the house crying, and asked his mother what the old woman meant, for he had never heard the story of his father's death. As soon as he learned what had happened, the boy determined to search for his father, and, try as she would, his mother could not dissuade him. As he was departing through the gate of the town with his spear and head axe, Kanag struck his shield and it sounded like 1,000 warriors. "How brave that boy is," said the surprised people. "He is braver even than his father." When he reached the spring of the giantess, he again struck his shield and shouted so that the whole world trembled. Then the giantess said, "I believe that someone is going to fight, and he will have success." As soon as Kanag reached the place where the old woman, Alakotan, lived, she sent her dog after him, but with one blow of his head axe he cut off the dog's head. Then Alakotan asked where he was going, and when he had told her, she said, "Your father is dead, but I believe that you will find him, for you have a good sign." He hurried on and arrived at the place where lightning was, and it asked, "Where are you going, little boy?" "I am going to Edison to get my father," answered Kanag. "Go stand on that high rock that I may see what your sign is," said the lightning. So he stood on the high rock, and when the bright flash came he did not move, and the lightning bade him hasten on, as he had a good sign. The thunder, which saw him passing, also called to ask where he was going, and it commanded him to stand on the high rock. And when the thunder made a loud noise, Kanag did not move, and it bade him go on, as his sign was good. The women of Edison were at the spring of Gagon dipping water, when suddenly they were startled by a great noise. They rose up, expecting to see 1,000 warriors coming near, but though they looked all around they could see nothing but a young boy striking a shield. "Good morning, women who are dipping water," said Kanag. "Tell Gagon that he must prepare, for I am coming to fight him." So all the women ran up to the town and told Gagon that a strange boy was at the spring and he had come to fight. "Go and tell him," said Gagon, "that if it is true that he is brave, he will come into the town, if he can." When Kanag reached the high bank outside the town, he jumped like a flitting bird up the bank into the town and went straight to the spirit house of Gagon. He noticed that the roofs of both the dwelling and the spirit houses were of hair, and that around the town were many heads, 40, and he pondered, "This is why my father did not return. Gagon is a brave man, but I will kill him." As soon as Gagon saw him in the yard he said, "How brave you are, little boy, why did you come here?" "I came to get my father," answered Canag, "for you kept him when he came to get oranges for my mother. If you do not give him to me, I will kill you." Gawagon laughed at this brave speech and said, "Why, one of my fingers will fight you. You shall never go back to your town, but you shall stay here and be like your father." "We shall see," said Canag. "Bring your arms and let us fight here in the yard." Gawagon was beside himself with rage at this bold speech, and he brought his spear and his head-axe, which was as big as half the sky. Canag would not throw first, for he wanted to prove himself brave, so Gawagon took aim and threw his head-axe at the boy. Now Canag used magical power, so that he became an ant and was not hit by the weapon. Gawagon laughed loudly when he looked around and could not see the boy, for he thought that he had been killed. Soon, however, Canag reappeared, standing on the head-axe, and Gawagon, more furious than ever, threw his spear. Again Canag disappeared, and Gawagon was filled with surprise. Then it was Canag's turn and his spear went directly through the body of the giant. He ran quickly and cut off 5 of the heads, 41, but the 6th he spared until Gawagon should have shown him his father. As they went about the town together, Canag found that the skin of his father had been used for a drumhead. His hair decorated the house, and his head was at the gate of the town, while his body was put beneath the house. After he had gathered all the parts of the body together, Canag used magical power, and his father came to life. "Who are you?" asked Apenitala. "How long have I slept?" "I am your son," said Canag. "You were not asleep but dead, and here is Gawagon who kept you. Take my head-axe and cut off his remaining head." So Apenitala took the head-axe, but when he struck Gawagon it did not injure him. "What is the matter, father?" asked Canag, and taking the weapon he cut off the 6th head of Gawagon. Then Canag and his father used magic so that the spears and head-axes flew about, killing all the people in the town, and the heads and valuable things went to their home. When Apanabalinian saw all these come into her house, she ran to look at the vine by the stove, and it was green and looked like a jungle. Then she knew that her son was alive, and she was happy. And when the father and son returned, all the relatives came to their house for a great feast, and all were so happy that the whole world smiled.